The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Movie and TV Shows. Hey everyone, I'm Thomas Sanjurjo, and you're listening to our second episode in our Secrets of Dune series, where we're going to discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings of Frank Herbert's Dune and its various media representations. Joining me on the panel here today are Jack Baruzzini. Hi, Jack.
How's it going?
Going well. And Andrew Hermiz. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, what's going on?
Not much. I'm excited. We've been trying to sit on this one for a while and finally got around to recording it. So looking forward to it. So this is the second in our series of discussions about Dune as we wait patiently for Denis Villeneuve's treatment of the tale. We started with the 1984 movie, which probably was not the most accurate reflection of Herbert's vision, but it sure was interesting. Tonight we're covering the longer but no less impressive 3-part miniseries produced by the SciFi Channel back in 2000, way back when they actually spelled sci-fi correctly. So if that kind of gives you an indication of the...
It's not sci-fi.
Yeah, not sci-fi. This gives you an indication of the theme, and I think it's a good place to start with. We're talking about, this is a much more traditionally science fiction look at the story of Paul Muad'Dib and Arrakis. And Andrew, is this the first time you had seen this one?
This is the first time I've seen it, yeah.
All right. And Jack, you'd seen it before, right?
Yeah, it'd been a while, but I've watched it before.
Yeah, I watched this one when it first came out, and I was very excited about it when it did. So what are your thoughts, Andrew, compared to the David Lynch movie?
This was very boring. It was a bit of a struggle to get through. Compared to the David Lynch movie, I know we're comparing like a longer miniseries, to a 2-hour movie, but having a unique perspective on this panel, for not having read the book, and before watching this miniseries, the David Lynch movie was the only sort of Dune material I've ever been exposed to. At least the David Lynch, movie was fun. There, like we talked about in that podcast, you can appreciate the campiness. You can appreciate the, a lot of the good things that had going for it. Like, I thought the costumes were impressive. And the costumes in this one were just not good. Like the costuming was not good.
Like those giant triangles hanging out behind everybody's head.
Yeah, dude. The guild was they just looked really weird in this one. And, we'll get into it some more, but overall, there are things that it definitely did better than the Lynch version. And again, not having read the book, I understand this is much more faithful to the book than Lynch's. And so I guess for me, I couldn't appreciate that part, obviously, but other than some moments that I think are better. I just didn't enjoy it as much. Couldn't appreciate it. And again, watching something from early 2000s TV, early sci-fi, the CGI obviously is dated, and that kind of has an effect on the viewing experience. But yeah, overall, it was kind of a chore to get through for me.
This one is definitely a lot longer, and it digs into the detail of the book a lot more, which is hard to do. It's always hard to dig into detail of a book in a movie format,
right?
Because you have to tell a lot of the story rather than just being able to show it, and that's always dangerous.
Yeah,
I don't disagree that it was much more effort to watch than the 1984 movie.
Sure.
How about you, Jack? You'd seen it before, so what were your thoughts?
The first time I'd seen it, I actually had not read the book yet. So I liked it a lot more on the second viewing, actually knowing where the story was going and having the context. And I do definitely see how, if you've not read the book, it can be kind of, you can get lost in it because they filmed it in a way that was kind of hard to follow. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the stuff I just was able to infer because I'd read the book. But overall, I enjoyed it, and I have a soft spot for like terrible 90s science fiction television, so it really scratched that itch.
that it does, with the cheesy blocky graphics for the ships and stuff.
Yeah.
I thought, going back to your comment, Andrew, about the costumes, my wife only watched the first block, so she didn't watch all 3 parts. She just watched the first one.
The worst block.
I know, the worst part. That's what I told her. It was like, man, you missed out on the really good stuff. But she made the comment when they first got out of one of the ornithopters and they were looking at the mining vessel. She's like, oh man, this is like costume straight out of Monty Python.
That's a good observation.
I couldn't argue with her.
Yeah.
I couldn't argue with her because she was absolutely right.
Yep.
And from that point on, man, the costumes just kind of like, I tried to like really dig into it and go, okay, like they're going with kind of like an iconography thing where they have like halos behind the characters that need the halos and things. But then when you get to that last scene and Paul has on this like Kung Fu Kid costume as the new emperor, it's like, oh man, where did this even come from? So yeah, I agree. The costumes really could have used a lot of work. I like this one. This one I had probably read the book maybe 6 times by this. And I have to tell you guys, this is my book. I read this book every year from the time that I was probably 13 until 26, 27 years old, and multiple times some years in there. So I know this book very, very well.
Yeah.
And I appreciated this series because of that. I think the first time through I watched it, I was like, finally, this is a good presentation of it. And being that it was like, it was the end of the 90s type of sci-fi, I could get behind the CGI. It wasn't too terrible. And the costumes weren't awful for a made for TV miniseries. So I liked it. And I have to say, I think that the casting of William Hurt in the role of Duke Leto Atreides was just spot on. So much so that I really do. That is the way I think of him when I read the book. Whenever I go back to the book. So how did you guys feel about the characters and the casting in this one? I know that there were some issues we had with the last one, like Harkonnen was weird.
Yeah,
it was so weird.
Yeah, I feel like it felt like as the series went on, the actors got more comfortable with their characters, because starting out, everyone felt very stiff, very wooden, especially Paul. Mm-hmm. Like he came across as he reminded me of when Hayden Christensen played Anakin. That same kind of feel.
Yes.
But I feel like as he went on, he kind of came into the role and it got a lot better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't say it got so much better, but he did start off like this was a whiny Paul, and I don't know if Paul was that whiny in the book, but it started off pretty whiny, and it just, he never sat well with me throughout the whole movie. And if you don't know the story, I mean, obviously I know the story, but I didn't read the book, like I've said. But if you don't know the story, you would think you kind of can't blame them that William Hurt was a star of this thing. Yeah. Watching the first block, especially, and you would think Paul's just a minor character, I thought the casting of William Hurt was good, and I kind of thought he phoned it in for this. But William Hurt phoning it in is still better than anyone else in the cast. So
that's absolutely true. You're right.
So he was great. His presence is always great on screen. I thought Baron was much better in this one than in the Lynch version. And other than that, I think overall it's as good and as bad as you would expect from a TV miniseries, from sci-fi. So I thought the casting was, knowing what you're getting into, I thought it was just fine. But the Paul casting again, I even thought, gosh, why am I blanking on his name? Lynch's version.
Kyle MacLachlan.
I thought he was not the best Paul. because that was like very early in his career. I think it was his first major role. Like we talked about in the first podcast. And I think they just didn't nail it with Paul in this one either, in my opinion. And, we'll see. Hopefully Timothée Chalamet has the chops for it. I mean, he definitely has the work, if you look at if you've seen any of his work, he's a pretty well established actor for how young he is. And, there's a lot riding on him. But I don't think we've seen the right Paul yet. And I know I can't, me saying that doesn't carry that much weight for not having read the book yet, but I think we can agree that, that character probably deserves, a lot better than we've seen on live action.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
And he's a hard character to nail too. Like, I think the one thing they do very poorly in this miniseries is showing Paul's feeling about who he is, because throughout the book, one of the major themes is that he's resisting his future, and you don't really get a sense of that. You get a sense that he's whiny and he doesn't really want to kind of progress, but there's no real feeling that he doesn't want to become who he must become. And that's hard to act, though. It's really hard to do that without coming across as whiny.
I think that's one of the hard things about adapting Dune to the screen, because so much of the character work is done with internal monologues in the book. And you can do what they did in the David Lynch version, where they have all these really awkward voiceovers, or you can try to show that through character actions more. And I don't feel like either adaptation so far has really gotten that down.
I very much agree with that point. Yeah. And I think that, a lot of it depends too on how the movie's kind of put together. Like, what are the themes it's focusing on? It's kind of, when you look at this book, it was a very specific kind of time and place, and it fit sort of in that space of, the 50s and 60s and the zealotry that was coming up from all of the different places in the world where there were this non-conforming belt, and peoples were the same people that were still having not be part of the quote unquote global community today. Right. And it looked very different portraying that in the 80s than it did in the early 2000s before, the World Trade Center and all of that, all of our motion back into the Middle East. We had just come out of a war in the 90s and in that area, and we're about to be diving back into one. So, I think you look at the things like the zealotry of the Freeman and the religious tones of the story that kind of come through here, and it's different. It's very different than the Lynch film. But that treatment can really change how you talk about how the characters come across in the series. So I think that's one thing. So Andrew, you hadn't seen it until now, so that's kind of, it might have been different for you. But Jack, how did you feel about watching it at that point? Did you have any of that kind of stuff going on?
I did, and it definitely felt like a very dated portrayal of that kind of story. Like, you could, if you didn't say what years is from, I'd be like 98, 99, 2000.
Right.
It definitely has that feel.
Yeah.
I feel like you could even compare it to the new Battlestar Galactica, which I feel like took a lot of the same themes but handled them better. And that came out just a few years later.
That's true. It did. Yeah. It was it was 03, I think, 03, 04, sometime.
Yeah, that sounds right.
04, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was interesting, and like watching the political, because this one focused a lot more on the politics than the David Lynch version. You had a lot more shots of the Emperor and of the Emperor's daughter, Irulan, who was an interesting addition to this, because the book kind of toys with that idea, but doesn't really full on go there as much as it does in this movie. And that's I liked how they pulled that political aspect of it in, but it definitely changes the timbre of what the Lady Jessica is doing when she's encouraging, who she had a much bigger role in this movie for sure. But, when she's encouraging Paul to embrace what these people think of him, and kind of pushing him to become this religious figure. And it's a very different feel than even the story in the book portrays of her. where she's almost resisting his fate as well. She knows what his fate is, and she's kind of resisting it, but knows that they have to survive. And you see a very different side of them in here, which is, I think it changes. Like, it changes the way that the actor has to portray what they're going for. And that's one thing that I'm really interested in seeing how this new series comes out. Have you guys seen the new Blade Runner?
Yes.
2049? Oh man,
yes.
I definitely recommend it if you haven't seen it.
Amazing.
Yeah, it really is. You see that Denis Villeneuve understands the story that was being told in the first one, makes a new version of it for our day and age, because that movie is definitely a dated, 1980s. The original Blade Runner is definitely a 1980s movie. This is definitely a 2000s movie, but it doesn't forgo any of the things that were portrayed. It just deepens them by kind of diving into that next level. And that's really what I'm hoping for with this series of movies, that, and I trust that he'll do it, but that he's going to just take that next step and like really dive into the story fully and then update it to where we are now.
Right. I think something that is lacking in this version is that they focus a lot on kind of the pseudo-religious aspects of Paul and his takeover of the Fremen, but they don't really dive into the backstory that they have in the book with how the Bene Gesserit set up that belief system throughout the galaxy. And I think that's a big part of it, is they're almost just, Paul and Jessica are caught up in this thing that is much bigger than them, that is just moving forward, and they really don't have a choice at the end of the day.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think they tried to touch on it. That's one of the things that you see in this movie. They tried to touch on a lot of that stuff, but you see that it kind of gets out of control after a little while. I think, which I think it happened with the 84 movie. It happened with this movie, and we're next going to try and move, I think, into the failed version of the movie that didn't happen. I think that's one of our next topics that we're going to look at, is the 70s version that didn't happen, because I believe the same kind of thing happened there, where it just kind of the person in control of it lost control of it, and it just took off on its own train, which is hilarious when it's very meta to the whole concept of the main character of this story is like just losing control of his life, and like it's kind of getting out of hand.
Well, what's funny, I'm sure you guys have been following the news with Warner Brothers announcing that they're going to release all their films in 2021 on HBO Max the same day it comes out in theaters. And then I'm sure you guys saw Denis Villeneuve's reaction to that.
Yeah,
and he
was not happy.
Not happy with is an understatement. He wrote a pretty scathing. I don't know if he wrote a letter or if it was in an interview, but his words were pretty damning, and I thought they were much more harsh than Christopher Nolan's what Christopher Nolan had to say. But there are rumors now surrounding the movie where they're kind of Legendary Pictures is the co-producer. Warner Brothers is the distributor, and Legendary was not aware of HBO's or Warner Brothers plan to do this. So they're there's nothing concrete, but they're threatening lawsuits. They're
oh wow,
because over this, and who knows if that will delay this movie even longer. I mean, I really hope not. For
no.
Yeah, for our sake,
go get it solved, man. Get it solved.
But I mean, I don't know how much say he has. I think Warner Brothers can pretty much do what they want in the situation. But
yeah,
but it's just funny that you mentioned that, because don't be so sure that that date will hold.
We haven't seen that.
Yeah.
Maybe it happens here. Maybe that's just the curse of Dune on the screen, right?
Honestly, yeah. It might be.
It's never make it.
Well, I think it's funny too, because like I think we take for granted the miniseries format today. It's something that we see a lot of, kind of with Netflix and with Amazon Prime. You can just grab, let's just do a short run of something, get it on there, and not anticipate having to syndicate it and all of the many long passages of things that happen of like a 10 season running TV show or something like that. And I think that's a kind of a unique thing to this time period. We were coming out of the 90s where we had like a bunch of Star Treks. We had this incredibly long running X-Files that was still going on at this point, but, was kind of running its course by this time. And then one of my favorites was Babylon 5 that ended just 2 years before this came out, which if you haven't seen Babylon 5, it's must watch TV. You have got to go back and see it. Even with the dated graphics, it's a fantastic show.
Yeah, the graphics are as good as this Dune.
Oh yeah, they're absolutely as good. But
it's a great show,
and not an iota better. But it's a great show. It really is. The costuming and makeup in that one though is fantastic. It is spot on. They did not spare a dime on the costuming in that one. And then, we've got a couple years still before we're coming up to the mid thousands, the Battlestar Galacticas, the next generation of them. Sadly, Firefly, they, hit early 2000s and should have been a much longer show than it was. But, I think it's interesting that we, this was one that it was a story that fit this period, and they went on and they did another one. They did a Children of Dune, which I haven't watched, but I really only like the first book anyway. So that's my excuse for not watching the rest of it. But this is kind of the thing that was it. I'm surprised that it got made just because of how much serialization of everything was going on at the time. That's what are your guys' thoughts about that?
I think this is something that could have been, if it had come a decade later, would have been picked up by HBO and could have gone the Game of Thrones route, where they would have put a lot of money into it and tried to do every single book in the series. And, depending on what your view of the end of Game of Thrones was, it could have been good or it could have been terrible. But I feel like it came out a little bit before we got that switch of television where people actually realized you could do movie quality storytelling and movie quality effects in television.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like the fact that they're breaking up the new one into multiple series just so they can tell a whole story.
Yeah, definitely.
I think looking back, reading a little bit about the history of this was sort of like sci-fi's big thing, like at the time. It was a fairly new network, if I'm not mistaken, and this was kind of like I don't know if it was their launch title, but it was kind of like their biggest thing to date, and they kind of banked on it for their future. And the miniseries format, I think, obviously is perfect for a property like this. And I know that, like you said, Denis Villeneuve is going to break, do one half of the book, I think, right, for the first one, and then do a second one. So that's essentially, if you put them together, the length of a miniseries. So I think that works. And again, for a property like Dune, I'm pretty sure one day we'll probably get like that Game of Thrones type of series for this property. Especially if the movies do really well, then they're gonna bank on it and do spin-offs and series and do the other books and all that stuff. So, but yeah, I think for today's time, it's doing for a streaming platform. It's a good sort of test for any property to do a mini series, because then if it does really well, you can say, oh, we're going to do a season 2, and then or we're going to if it doesn't do well, then it was like, it was just a contained story. So it just works. That sort of format just works for the time we're in now, and it allows us to have all this content, because we don't have to wait for it to show up in a movie theater, and be sort of constrained to the 2 to 3 hour format. So, it's all great. And I think the ratings were really well for this, if I'm not mistaken.
I think when it came out, it did well. It did pretty well.
Yeah, it was successful.
I think if and I don't know, was it well received critically at the time? Do you know that?
I think pretty well received. It seems like it's liked overall. I think that over time, people's view of it has gone down just because it's aged so poorly.
Yeah.
But overall, I think people liked it.
It was really ambitious too. That's the other thing. At the time, it was a big deal, and it was from a relatively unknown, well, not unknown, but a relative to the big names, because it wasn't a CBS, NBC, ABC production. These guys, these guys were off the beaten path.
I remember Sci-Fi was a joke. Yeah, I mean, I remember back then. Yeah, the Sci-Fi Channel was like, man, if you want to watch like just really cheap, campy,
right,
sci-fi, that's where you want to go, and for a lot, that's a very like sort of niche thing, and I'm actually surprised that sci-fi has lasted this long, but because they had kind of had that reputation for a while, but I guess there are enough people that are into that to keep it alive.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun stuff. Well, they had The Expanse, but then they messed that up and lost it to Amazon. That's
right. Yeah, Amazon just came out with or is about to come out or something like that. Yeah,
fifth season just dropped. I haven't watched it yet, but man, I'm looking forward to it. That's a great show.
I haven't watched that one yet, but it's on my list to get into.
That's a really good one. That's hard science fiction, which I think is what a lot of people have trouble swallowing, the hard science fiction, where it's. And I will say, I think going back to, where you were talking about this one before, that this series was a lot more boring than the David Lynch series. There was a lot of density to it. And that's one of the things about the book is the book itself was really ambitious in science fiction because it was really in that golden age science fiction writing style where there weren't a lot of, ships flying around fighting each other in space. There wasn't a lot of there was one really big battle right at the end, and that was pretty much it. Other than that, it was just kind of building these characters and how they were dealing with the world that they were dealing with. And, that's kind of the golden age trope of like, what does the world of the future look like and how has it affected us? And it wasn't until we got into that next generation of science fiction where we started getting the space operas like Star Wars that really took the stage and kind of became much more popular. Even with Star Trek, there's still a lot of exploration, space battles and things like that. You don't get quite as much of the just person to person interaction.
Right.
So, it's a very different kind of science fiction, and The Expanse sort of fits in there, but then does some really neat things with it. And my favorite part about The Expanse is that everything is absolutely real. Like this is what the technology will likely actually look like when we get to that level of moving around.
Right. There's no artificial gravity or warp drives. Mm-hmm. Something that I like about Dune, and this is more applied to the book than the adaptions, but it does a really good job of making its world feel natural and lived in, and the technology feels believable for the world. It doesn't feel like something that someone just sat down and made up. It's kind of the same thing with Lord of the Rings. It has that same depth of world building. Yeah,
this miniseries, I thought, did a good job of building the world of Arrakis, much more than the Lynch version. And obviously, a lot of that has to do with has more time to do it. But I thought that's one of the bright spots. Was it really built the world, did the world building aspects really well.
Yeah, no, that was, and it's interesting too, because it's also on top of the consistency of the world. There's a lot of anachronisms that are prevalent throughout Dune. You got Gurney Halleck with his loot that he carries around everywhere, and all of the swashbuckling sort of nature of it, because you have to get in close quarters combat because of the shields, and it's kind of like Frank Herbert wanted this internally consistent world, and so he said, I want it to be internally consistent, but I also want them to be able to fight with swords. How do I make that happen? And so he made it happen, and it worked. But yeah, you do have to, I like that he addressed that he didn't just, kind of wave his hand at it and say, well, people just like fighting with swords. So there we go. They're fighting with swords now.
Right. And one thing I really appreciated about this, as opposed to the David Lynch version, is that they do the weirding way more correctly. They still don't handle it the way it is in the book,
right?
But they don't have those weird voice boxes that they just shout at people. Which is one of my least favorite parts about that movie.
No, I know. Oh my gosh. And I will say, as a Catholic, I really want to see Dr. Yue actually fully portrayed in this new series, because Yue is a Catholic and he has this tiny little Catholic Bible that he carries with him everywhere so that he can reference it. And it's so small that he has to have magnifying glasses to be able to read it in the book. And it adds so much depth to that character when you get to that betrayal part and you know the story of Judas, and you've brought in all of that into how he views Leto and what he's trying to do by giving Leto this chance to defeat the great evil. And in the process, he's betraying him and his family to do it. And Yue is one of my favorite characters that just kind of gets sidelined as the traitor in these movie presentations of him. So I would really like to see that kind of come more to the forefront. And I know it's difficult because, you got a character that you're going to invest a whole bunch of time in that's really only there to serve that one purpose of getting from them landing on Arrakis to the Harkonnens being able to come in and take over. But he really is very central to like everything that happens at that point.
Yeah, and they really don't cover that in either version. Mm-hmm. He's just kind of the one-dimensional, kills him, and then he's to come.
All right. Any final thoughts about this one? I know this is a shorter episode for a longer series, but it was good. It was all right.
So if you like Dune, it's worth watching. But right. If you don't like Dune, I would not recommend this as an intro to that world, especially if you're used to watching higher quality television.
It'll be interesting after I read the book if I appreciate this miniseries more. Because from the sounds of it, it looks like it's pretty much for people who've read the book. I think if you haven't been introduced to Dune, there's plenty of early 2000s sci-fi that you could watch. That's probably better. Like you mentioned, Babylon 5 and Battlestar Galactica is amazing. I haven't seen Babylon 5, but Battlestar Galactica is brilliant. It was a weird production choice to not shoot at an actual desert. Right. I think they could have easily the production design could have easily looked a lot better. They just shot on a location. I mean, I was reading up on a little bit about the production, and they shot this in I forgot where, somewhere in Eastern Europe. I'm like, why did they choose to shoot there? I mean, they could have. I mean, unless it was like super cheap to shoot at this place, but I feel like they could have. It would have gone a long way if they just found a desert and just shot there.
Yeah.
But I just thought of that, and
there's a lot of that matte background going on.
Right. Yeah. And again, it's for something that's so early 2000s, it's just so dated and just looks so wrong. But I think even if, you look at like Villeneuve's, version, like they're obviously shooting, at actual deserts, and they're not. It's not like green screen or anything like that. And I mean that's what makes it so easy. If you do a sci-fi and you describe the planet as just this desert sort of thing,
right.
you can get it done. You can make it happen.
It feels like a play.
Yeah,
it
exactly.
does.
Yeah,
there are so many points where it does.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I wonder directorially if that's kind of where the experience was coming from, because you do see a lot of blocking in this one that is really just bizarre and doesn't make sense for the camera work that's going on, but would make sense if it was all on stage. I think especially at that last scene where he fights Feyd-Rautha, and it looks like it was made for you to be sitting in the audience watching that scene on come out on the stage. That's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that, but yeah.
Yeah, once you view it that way, it's kind of easier to watch it. You just, okay, this is a stage play.
Yeah.
Huh. Very good observation, yeah.
And the costumes with the big triangles and circles.
Yeah. Oh, man.
And Princess Irulan's hats, man. Oh, my goodness.
Someone likes their weird hats in that production.
Oh, wow. It was almost like it was easy, just shorthand to trying to kind of put people in weird hats. And okay, so all the Space Guild's going to have this bizarre hat thing that's going on. It's like, okay. Let's run with it. See, there you go. All right. Anything else from you guys?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, that is it from us. What do you think about the 2000 miniseries Dune? Either the first time you watched it or on a rewatch? Be sure to email us or comment on our Facebook or Twitter page and let us know. You can email us any feedback by finding StarQuest on Facebook at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia and on Twitter at SQPN. We'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create Secrets of Movies and TV. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Movie TV and all the shows here at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. Also, be sure to subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or the SQPN YouTube channel. To find previous episodes of Secrets of Movie and TV shows, please visit sqpn.com/secrets of movie and TV shows, separated by dashes. Next time, we'll be talking about the failed attempt to bring the story to life in Jodorowsky's Dune, which was a 70s attempt to kind of do a psychedelic version of Dune. And I'll admit, I have not seen this one, so I'm really looking forward to our watch and talk about this. And, you know, like we've been talking about, why this property can inspire so much fervor that it seems to drive projects into the ground. So until then, Andrew Hermiz, thank you for joining me for the Secrets of Dune.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And Jack Baruzzini, thank you as well.
Thanks, Thomas.
And once again, I'm Thomas Sanjurjo. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Movie and TV on StarQuest.